Hello class, and welcome to lecture 17.5 of Philosophy 205. I call this lecture 17.5 because it's not one of the primary lectures in this unit, but it does provide some interesting historical information about views people have held in the past, and it raises some interesting issues about the nature of the mind, even if the theories discussed are not particularly good. The question we're asking today is this: if the mind is an inner world, then how can we learn about other minds? This is probably a question that has occurred to you at some point, or it has occurred to a lot of people. Can you ever really know what somebody else is thinking? Can you even be sure that other people have minds? It seems like the nature of the mind is it's something only you can see. Only you can see your own mind. And that seems like it raises problems for learning about other minds. To motivate this worry, let's take a look at the common sense view of the mind. It's common sense to think that mental events are happening inside your mind. It's also common sense to think that you can't directly observe the mental events of other people. You can't directly observe what other people are thinking. You can't directly observe what they believe. What you can do is observe the effects. You can observe what people do, you can observe what people say, and from that you can figure out what they must have been thinking. But this raises a problem. So the problem of other minds is this: if the mental is inherently first person, so that it's just a fundamental nature of the mind that there's something it's like to experience having that mind, that what it means to be mental is that it's only visible from the first person, then we only have access to our own mind. But how can we know other minds? Again, the common sense view of the mind is that the mind is not like a rock. A rock is a publicly visible object. It's third person, so to speak. Whereas the mind is only directly observable to one person, the person whose mind it is. So nobody else can directly observe the mind the way they can directly observe a rock. So this raises a problem of how we can know anything about other minds at all. And some people have claimed that we can't, that we actually don't know whether other people have minds at all, let alone what they're thinking. Now, obviously, most people want to deny this. Most people want to claim, yes, we do have knowledge about other minds. So how can we explain how there's knowledge of other minds, given this common sense view that the mind is only directly observable to one person? Well, one attempt that was historically popular for a while in about the 30s and 40s, around that time, was known as logical behaviorism. Logical behaviorism has a negative and a positive thesis. The negative thesis of logical behaviorism is this: the mind is not first person. So it denies the claim that only I can directly observe my own mind. So even though that might seem strange, that's what logical behaviorism says. It claims that there's no such thing as private access to your own thoughts. There's nothing that's inherently private that's only available to you. Everything that exists is at least potentially publicly knowable, publicly observable. And if that's true, then there's no problem of knowing other minds. But here, this is only a negative thesis. It just says the mind isn't only accessible from the first person point of view. Now, by itself, that might seem mysterious and it's pretty weak. We want to know, well, if the mind isn't only accessible from the first person, then what is it? How do we access it? So logical behaviorism has a positive thesis as well. It says the mind is not first person only. What it is disposition to behave. So for example, saying she wants water essentially means she is disposed to drink water. So when we talk about somebody's desires, we're not talking about some internal mental state that only she can experience. We're not saying she's experiencing thirst, and that's not something we can directly observe. What we're actually doing, according to logical behaviorism, is we're just saying she's disposed to drink water. And for beliefs, if we say she believes there is a fire, that just means she's disposed to act like there is a fire. And now dispositions to behave are publicly observable. So if you're wondering what a disposition is, a disposition just means it's a tendency to do a certain thing in a certain situation. So a classic example of a disposition is brittleness. To be brittle means you have the disposition to break when you fall or are struck by something. So if you have a vase that's made out of very thin glass, that has the disposition to break if you throw it on the floor. And that's easily observable. You can observe it by throwing it on the floor and seeing if it breaks. And so according to behaviorism, mental terms are just like that. Saying that somebody believes something doesn't mean that there's some internal state inside their mind. It's saying that if you put them in a situation, they're going to respond this way. For example, saying she believes there is a fire in the house means if you put her in the house, she's going to try to get out. Right. So according to logical behaviorism, the mind is not only accessible from the inside. This lets us perform a certain kind of reduction, and behaviorists were largely motivated to perform this reduction. So their goal was to reduce everything mental to dispositions. Again, their goal was to eliminate this mysterious, what they viewed as problematic references to mental states and replace it with something that they found much more tractable, much easier to deal with, namely dispositions. You can observe dispositions. We don't have to do any guesswork. We don't have to worry about other minds. We can just observe the dispositions. So then we could replace talk, mental talk, with disposition talk. So here we have a theory that is suspicious of the mental, but thinks we could get rid of it and replace it entirely with talk about dispositions. Now, to say a little bit more about this theory, the claim is that the mind is basically a stimulus response mechanism. That if you put someone in a situation, then they will respond based on the stimuli they're getting. So if you put someone next to a fire, they're going to try to run away. In a burning house, for example. It's a stimulus, they see they're in a burning house, response, they run away. And that's all there is to the mind, according to this theory. Famous behaviorists included people like Skinner and Gilbert Ryle, and so they wanted to do this. But there are various problems with this theory. You can probably think of some on your own, but one problem is this particular drug, curare. So according to behaviorism, pain is something like an avoidance disposition. What it means to say someone is in pain isn't that they're experiencing any feeling. What it means to say someone is in pain is that they're disposed to get away from the thing causing them pain, something like that. But there's this drug known as curare, and when you take curare, you're completely immobilized, but you are in pain. When somebody takes this drug then, they have no disposition whatsoever to avoid anything that's causing them pain. They can't move at all. But people do experience pain. So this suggests that there's something wrong with behaviorism. We can perfectly understand the idea that somebody who isn't moving is in pain. But according to behaviorism, that shouldn't be possible. If they really are in pain, there should be some disposition that they have, some disposition to run away or something like that. There's another problem for beliefs and desires. So think about what it means to want water. When you want water, that doesn't just mean that you are disposed to drink water. It's more specific than that. You're disposed to drink what you believe is water. Or we could go further and say you're disposed to drink what you believe is uncontaminated water. But notice what's on the other side. When we're trying to explain what it means to want something, the explanation includes references to our beliefs. So wanting something is a mental state, but believing something is a mental state. Remember, behaviorists wanted to be able to get rid of all talk about mental states and replace it with dispositions. But here, in describing the disposition, we have to talk about mental states. So they haven't gotten rid of all talk about mental states. Seems like we can't do it. We can't just replace the mental with dispositions. So there's mental on both sides. You can't reduce the mental to dispositions. And you can think about this for any mental state you want to bring up. So think about beliefs. I kind of hesitated when I was describing what it means to believe there's a fire, because there are only certain circumstances where you run away from fire. If it's a campfire and you want to roast some marshmallows, you're going to go towards the fire. And so believing that there's a fire isn't just a single disposition. It depends on what you want to do. And that seems like a problem. It seems like there's no way to explain what people are doing based purely on simple stimulus-response dispositions. We want to explain why somebody moved toward a fire. We can't just say when people see a fire, they move toward it. We need to talk about their beliefs and their desires, what they wanted to do, what they thought was happening. It doesn't seem like there's any way to get around that. So we can't just throw away all the mental. So maybe there's another way we can explain behaviorism. There's a weaker version of behaviorism known as methodological behaviorism. And this is the one that B.F. Skinner was more famous for promoting. So what is methodological behaviorism? First of all, methodological behaviorism is not a theory about meaning. Logical behaviorism was a theory about meaning. It said mental state terms, like belief, refer to dispositions. So that what it means to say someone believes something is to say that they have a disposition. But this is different. Methodological behaviorism is actually a theory about how to do psychology. It doesn't try to explain away what our words mean. It's not saying when you talk about belief, you're actually talking about something else. It's saying this is the right way to do psychology. Now, how does it say we should do psychology? Much like logical behaviorism, methodological behaviorism starts with a negative thesis. First, it notes that beliefs and desires are generally thought to be hidden inner states. So the negative thesis is psychology shouldn't deal with them. This thesis became most popular, like I said before, around the 30s and 40s, when psychology was first trying to become a more rigorous science. And part of that was trying to be more like other sciences, trying to avoid reference to things that seemed mysterious and refer to things that are easier to deal with. So if beliefs and desires are hidden inner states and psychology wants to be a serious science, it shouldn't deal with them. Maybe beliefs and desires exist, maybe we talk about them, but science shouldn't deal with them. That's methodological behaviorism. Now, methodological behaviorism provided more reasons why it wanted to adopt this negative thesis. And one claim was you can always posit more beliefs and desires when your expectations aren't met, which means that hypotheses using beliefs and desires aren't testable. So if it's not clear what this means, let's go through an example. This example is wanting water. Actually, it's going to be apple juice. So let's say we have a hypothesis that someone wants apple juice. So our test subject wants apple juice. We're testing whether she wants apple juice. So then to test it, We offer her apple juice, but she doesn't drink the juice. She turns it down. All right, so we've done our test, and it looks like we've proven our hypothesis was false. She doesn't want apple juice because she didn't drink it. But if we're talking about beliefs and desires, remember, beliefs and desires have to combine to explain actions. So we could say, actually, she really does want the juice, but she thinks that what you're offering her is acid and not apple juice. So we can explain why our experiment failed by saying, oh, actually, she's got these extra beliefs and desires that we didn't think about before. Methodological behaviorists thought that you could always do this when you're explaining things in terms of beliefs and desires. You can always claim, oh, my initial hypothesis was true, but there are these new extra hidden beliefs and desires, and that you could never test anything. All right. Methodological behaviorism also had a positive thesis. The claim was that psychology should study stimulus response. Psychology should be about determining which environments cause which behaviors. And whether inner states like beliefs and desires exist or not, it doesn't matter because they don't need to be described. All psychology needs to do is figure out stimulus response based on different environments. Classic examples of behaviorist psychology involve rats pushing levers and chickens pecking things. So an example of behaviorist psychology is you put some chickens in a box, then you see what they peck, and then you try to determine when they peck stuff. Related experiments are you put rats in a box with different levers, and you give them a reward when they press a certain lever, you punish them when they press a different lever, and then see what this does to their behavior. So basically you're just figuring out when they're in this environment and they get this stimulus, what is their response? So these were classic psychology experiments that were carried out by methodological behaviorists. And they thought that's how all psychology should work. So they thought that shouldn't only apply to rats and chickens, that's how psychology should be done with humans. You put humans in different environments, and then you measure how they behave in different environments, and then you're doing psychology. You don't have to talk about beliefs and desires. It doesn't matter what people are feeling. All you have to do is figure out how do they respond in different environments. It has some problems. It seems like we're able to predict behaviors in new situations. If we take a human and put them in a situation they've never been in before, very often we'll be able to predict what they're going to do. For example, if that person says they've always wanted to drive a Ferrari, and then we put them in a situation they've never been in before, namely in a car lot full of Ferraris with the keys in there, and we tell them, you can drive any of these you want. We can predict what they're going to do. We can predict that they're going to pick one of the Ferraris and drive it, even though they've never been in that situation before. Why can we predict that they were going to do that? Well, we can predict it because we know something about what they want to do. Furthermore, we can explain new behavior in similar situations. So, for example, maybe we put that guy in the lot full of Ferraris and he drives a Ferrari and he's really excited about that. But then later, we put him in a lot full of Ferraris and he doesn't get in one and drive it. There can be situations where we could have predicted that beforehand. So maybe he had just gotten into a horrible accident in a Ferrari and he doesn't want to be in one again. And if we know that he doesn't want to be in a Ferrari again, then we can predict he's not going to do it, that he's going to do something new in a new situation. So again, this questions the stimulus response psychology that behaviorists want to do. It seems like that's not enough. Stimulus response could never deal with predicting behaviors in completely new situations or predicting completely new behaviors in similar situations. This also runs into problems with nature versus nurture. Essentially, methodological behaviorism assumes that nature is everything. There is no place for internal differences. Again, behaviorist psychology works by putting people or animals in situations, measuring how they respond in that situation, and then concluding, well, people in that situation respond this way. But in doing that, it places everything on just an innate, basic response structure that's completely immutable. It doesn't leave room for learning anything. It doesn't leave room for how people have raised you. It doesn't leave room for environmental influences. Basically, behaviorist psychology ignores the fact that we learn things. We learn to desire things. We learn to believe things. We aren't just rigid stimulus response mechanisms. And that's very clear. Right, so skepticism about other minds is bad. I mean, we do seem to know things about other minds. We don't want to be skeptics about other minds. So behaviorists suggest, why not deny that minds are inner? But for a lot of reasons, that's kind of stupid. So historically, behaviorism was an important theory in both philosophy and psychology. There were very prominent philosophers who argued that we shouldn't be thinking about the mind as something inner, that the mind really should be thought of as something completely publicly available. There's no such thing as first-person access to your own mind. That's not some special thing. Psychologists really did think that real science, real psychology should never talk about inner states like beliefs and desires and feelings. So historically, these were important theories. But for some of the reasons I've said and many more reasons that I haven't had time to go into, they don't really work as theories either in philosophy or psychology. But they do raise some interesting issues. They show us that beliefs and desires really are important in how we operate and what the mind is. And denying them is going to be a problem. All right, so I'll see you in the next lecture.